We all start our day with them, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Grab the shower gel, the deodorant, maybe a facial serum, moisturizer.
Some high-hold hair product.
Exactly. And of course, fragrance, we call them personal care products, PCPs. And they're not just everywhere, they are a fundamental layer of modern daily life. But lurking inside these essentials are often hidden chemical components. Things like phthalates, parabens, and various endocrine-disrupting chemicals, EDCs.
And that ubiquity you mentioned, that's the crucial context for this deep dive.
Right.
We're taking a look at a really insightful study that examines how the frequency of using these PCPs, and maybe more importantly, the perception of their safety, differs across major racial and ethnic groups right here in the U.S.
So our mission here is to move beyond those, generalized warnings.
Exactly. We want to pinpoint where the chemical exposure risk actually falls, and what's really fascinating, why the awareness of that risk varies so dramatically depending on who you are.
And the source material for this, it comes from a pretty robust self-reported questionnaire, right?
Yeah, it sampled 770 diverse U.S. adults, a relatively young group, mean age of about 22.8 years, recruited from a university campus and online.
Okay, and they tracked daily use for, 23 different personal care products?
23, yeah. Organized into categories like makeup, skincare, fragrance, and they also took a detailed look at the participants' perceptions of safety and risk.
So what's the big takeaway? The thing that jumps out immediately?
Well, what frames our entire conversation today is that the primary finding highlights a significant, a quantifiable health equity issue.
An equity issue?
The study found statistically significant differences not just in how much product people use, but in the types of products, meaning the sources of their chemical exposure and their critical assessment of the inherent risks.
And all of that is strongly linked to race and ethnicity.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into who's using what, we have to establish why these chemicals are even a concern.
Yeah.
What exactly makes PCPs risky? I mean, we hear the acronym EDCs a lot, but what are they actually doing inside the human body?
They're called endocrine-disrupting chemicals because their entire function is to, interfere with, mimic, or even block our natural hormone systems, our endocrine system.
They're like imposters.
That's a great way to put it. They're imposters confusing the body's internal communication network. PCPs frequently contain specific EDCs like parabens, which are, cheap, effective antimicrobial preservatives.
Okay.
And phthalates, which are often used to make plastics flexible or as solvents in fragrances.
And when those hormones get disrupted, especially in women's bodies, and I think the study showed higher use among females, what specific health outcomes are we actually looking at?
The primary concern centers on reproductive health and developmental changes, particularly during vulnerable life stages.
Like puberty.
Exactly. For instance, exposure to EDCs has been linked to an earlier onset of menarche, the first menstrual period, and accelerated breast development.
And later in life.
Later in life, this disruption raises concerns about increased risks for hormone-sensitive conditions, including breast or endometrial cancer. And the connection can be chillingly direct. Parabens, for example, have actually been detected in breast cancer tumors.
So they're not just passing through the body.
No, they're accumulating.
Yeah.
In vulnerable tissues.
That immediately highlights a huge consumer protection problem, doesn't it? If the risks are this significant, we should know precisely what we're putting on our skin and hair.
But manufacturers aren't exactly prioritizing transparency.
No.
And that's the perfect way to phrase it. It's not just a technical loophole, it's a massive regulatory gap. It places the burden of risk assessment squarely on you, the consumer.
So even though the FDA technically regulates these products.
Right. Under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the rules have historically allowed manufacturers to just omit listing all ingredients, especially when they're categorized under umbrella terms like fragrance or parfum.
Which basically hides the contents from the average person.
Precisely. So even if you're trying to be an informed consumer, you can't be. The information is missing.
Right.
So you combine this continuous multi-product exposure with a severe lack of transparency, and you get a perfect scenario for, undetermined substantial risks.
And here's the kicker, right?
Here's the kicker. Prior studies have already found that these risks have not been distributed evenly. They've historically been found to differ significantly by race and ethnicity, and this latest study gives us concrete evidence of how that pattern plays out in our daily choices.
Okay, let's get to that data now. To set a baseline, what were the most frequently used products across the entire sample? Just, across the board.
Across the board, regardless of demographics, three products really dominated daily use. The most frequent was deodorant or antiperspirant.
I would guess that.
Yeah, 81.4% of participants used it daily. Following that were fragranced hand soap, used daily by 72.3%, and then fragrance soap or body wash at 66.1%.
So that tells us that pretty much everyone is consistently exposed to fragrance compounds and likely EDCs through just basic hygiene.
Yes, basic essentials. But the real divergence, the interesting part, starts when we look at the usage extremes among different groups.
This is where that equity issue sharpens.
It really does. We saw major differences in the product categories driving overall use. For example, the Middle Eastern and North African, or MINEM, participants reported the highest average daily PCP use overall.
How high?
48.4% of all products listed. They specifically led in daily use of makeup at a 35.4% average, and skincare products at 55%.
So a heavy focus on facial and cosmetic application.
Exactly.
And then the non-Hispanic Black participants, and we should probably use the full description to maintain clarity, they showed entirely different patterns, right? Focused more on hair and body.
They did. Non-Hispanic Black participants reported the highest daily use of general hairstyling products at a remarkable 52%.
52%. Wow.
And hand or body lotion at 78%.
78.
And if we think about the market context, this makes a lot of sense. Research has shown that non-Hispanic Black women historically purchased 9 times more ethnic hair and beauty products compared to other racial and ethnic groups.
And those specific products.
Those specific market segments, the ethnic hair and body care products, have frequently been reported in past studies to contain higher concentrations of some of the most concerning EDCs, especially phthalates.
So that means that two different ethnic groups, MENA and non-Hispanic Black participants, might be getting a high dose of EDCs, but the primary source is completely different.
Completely different. Makeup and skincare for one group, and specialized hair and body products for the other.
And that difference dictates what specific chemicals they're facing.
Which is vital for targeting any future health interventions. Another stark difference was in sunscreen use.
Right, because many sunscreens use UV filters that are also considered EDCs.
They are. And non-Hispanic Black participants reported significantly less frequent daily sunscreen use compared to, say, white participants.
Which is likely tied to that historical and really enduring misconception that increased melanin provides enough protection from UV harm.
It's a complex, culturally reinforced factor for sure. Now, contrast that with the Mayane group.
Who showed high use.
Relatively high use of sunscreen, yeah. This is often culturally widespread in Arabic populations, driven by awareness campaigns and cultural standards. But here's the irony.
They're avoiding sun damage, but
they're still exposing themselves to EDCs because so many sunscreen formulations contain those chemical UV filters. It's a classic example of a substitution risk. You solve one problem and create another.
We also saw differences in basic hygiene practices. The non-Hispanic Black participants reported significantly less frequent use of fragranced shampoo and conditioner compared to white participants.
Right, and that finding is highly nuanced. It's likely connected to differing hair care regimens, which might involve less frequent washing and conditioning cycles, often tied to managing hair texture and the function of the products themselves.
Okay, so let's pull all this data together. If we connect this to the bigger picture of public health equity, what do these differential use patterns fundamentally tell us?
They strongly suggest that these chemical exposure patterns aren't just random consumer preferences.
It's not just what you like the smell of.
No. They're often driven by powerful external social factors, specifically the pressure to conform to what sociologists term standards of idealized whiteness in professional and social settings.
Could you elaborate on that? Because that feels like the real psychological and social lever here.
Absolutely. The need to conform, whether it's through skin lightening, hair straightening, or just maintaining very high standards of cosmetic presentation, that can lead to buying and using more specialized products.
Or more expensive ones.
Or more expensive products, often those with less stringent regulation or more powerful chemical ingredients, simply in an effort to meet those socially imposed beauty standards.
So the cost of not conforming professionally or socially can feel much higher than the perceived cost of the chemical exposure.
That's it. This is systemic inequity translated directly into daily consumer behavior.
So the difference in product use isn't just about smell or texture. It's about navigating a world with asymmetrical beauty expectations.
Exactly. And the study reinforces this by showing that even when people are aware of the risks, those cultural and social imperatives often win out.
Okay, so here's where the study gets really interesting and maybe a little conflicted. How did participants feel about the products they were using? Did that high usage correlate with high trust, or did we see that conflict you just mentioned?
We saw a dramatic contrast, a huge one. White participants were significantly more likely to agree that personal care products were inherently safe. We're talking a 79% agreement rate.
Okay.
And 60% of them agreed that chemical additives are safer today than they were in the past. So there's a general sense of, optimism and trust in the regulatory systems.
And non-white participants, particularly non-Hispanic Black participants, had a profoundly different view on that safety.
Profoundly different. Non-Hispanic Black participants showed much lower agreement that PCPs are safe. Only 51% agreed.
So just over half.
Just over half.
Yeah.
And only 32% agreed that chemical additives are safer now. That is a massive gap in trust and perception of risk.
It is.
And then, looking at the MINE group, they were the most likely to believe there are health risks associated with PCP's 74% agreement, compared to only 54% among white participants.
So this raises a big question. Where does this profound gap in perception and trust come from? It's too significant to just be random skepticism.
No, it's not random. Non-white groups' consistently lower perception of safety is consistent with a lot of prior sociological and health studies. It's strongly attributed to a history of experiencing systemic racism, medical injustices, and environmental hazards.
Lived experience.
Lived experience. Groups that are historically marginalized have been exposed to more environmental risks, like living near polluters or having fewer choices and less regulated products. And they often have fewer choices available to them in terms of access to genuinely safer products.
That context is so important. If your lived experience involves being exposed to more hazards and being offered fewer safe choices, your baseline trust in the systems that are supposed to protect you,
Government, industry, medicine.
it's just going to be lower.
Precisely. And we saw this play out specifically in trust levels for science itself. Non-Hispanic Black participants reported the lowest trust in scientists to provide reliable information at 68% agreement.
Compared to what for white participants?
Compared to a robust 86%.
That is a huge difference.
It is. And the study posits that this low trust is directly linked to the history of unethical and inhumane experimentation in the U.S., which frequently used Black persons as research subjects. The knowledge of these events filters down through generations and fundamentally contributes to an established mistrust in modern scientific and medical authority.
It's fascinating how those historical injustices manifest today as a modern rational skepticism towards product safety claims.
It is rational skepticism. It's born of experience. But let's go back to the MINE group for a moment, because they present the most challenging insight.
Right. They had the highest use frequency and the highest risk awareness. How do those two conflicting states, knowing it's risky but doing it anyway, how do they coexist?
It seems to defy simple logic, right?
It does. If they're reporting the highest daily use of skincare and makeup, but are also the most likely to agree that PCPs pose health risks, why would you knowingly increase your risk exposure?
That's the definition of cognitive dissonance in action. The MINE participants, despite their high use, disagreed strongly that the chemical industry protects consumers. They know the risk is there. But here's the critical balancing factor: the cost of not using those products.
The social and cultural pressure.
The social and cultural pressure to maintain those specific high-standard beauty norms is often higher than the immediate perceived risk of chemical exposure.
So they recognize the risks, but they continue to use the products because not conforming to a strong social duty standard might feel like a bigger, more immediate risk to their professional or social life?
That's the psychological friction the study uncovered. These external, deeply ingrained societal influences can override known health concerns, forcing people into a difficult position where their daily behavior conflicts with their internal knowledge.
So what does this all mean for change? Despite all these dramatic differences, there was one huge, unifying area of consensus across all the groups.
Yes, something that cut right through the dissonance and the distrust.
And that was?
An overwhelming demand for transparency. Participants across all racial and ethnic groups shared the strong sentiment that PCP manufacturers should be required to list all ingredients present in the product.
How strong was the agreement?
The agreement on this point ranged from 87% to a full 100% across the different demographic groups.
That is nearly unanimous. And specifically, they wanted that industry loophole closed around fragrance.
Absolutely. They specifically agreed that the components of fragrance should be individually listed, not just grouped under that single opaque term.
Which is key, because fragrance often acts as a hiding place for phthalates and other EDCs.
Exactly. This is where consumers are demanding the most immediate accountability.
And there was a responsibility consensus too, right? Who should be holding the line on safety?
Over 80% of participants in each group agreed that the government should ultimately be responsible for ensuring ingredient safety in personal care products. It's a very clear mandate from the public. Regulate this industry more closely.
That public consensus leads us right to the most significant recent development in U.S. law, the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act of 2022.
MOCRE is highly significant because it finally addresses decades of pretty lax regulation. It aims to increase government accountability by requiring key changes. Like adverse event reporting must now be submitted to the FDA within 15 business days. The FDA also gains new authority to access records when they request them, and manufacturers now have to report updated lists of product ingredients to the FDA annually.
So that shifts the burden of proof, at least a little bit. Instead of the consumer having to prove harm, the manufacturer now has a much stronger obligation to report issues and be transparent with the regulator.
It establishes a much-needed, centralized framework for transparency and safety that it didn't exist before. It doesn't instantly solve the problem of cultural pressure or historical mistrust, but it provides the essential regulatory tools.
And throughout all the differences in trust levels we discussed, overall trust in scientists actually remained high enough to be a factor.
It absolutely does. Scientists have a crucial responsibility here in increasing environmental health awareness and educating the public, especially with these new regulations. The data is available. The next step is making it universally accessible and actionable.
So in summary, this deep dive really shows that demographic differences fundamentally shape both the type of EDCs people are exposed to
through highly specific product choices tied to social norms.
and their critical assessment of those risks.
Yes. These findings reflect broader social and environmental health inequities in the U.S., where background experiences of injustice lead to differential trust in the systems that regulate what we put on our bodies every single day.
And here is the final provocative thought for you to mull over. Despite non-Hispanic, Black, and MENA participants reporting a much higher and scientifically accurate perception of risk with these products, their daily use frequency remains high. This suggests that the cost of conformity, those social and economic factors, are powerful enough right now to override known health concerns. So if public health interventions can't address the emotional and societal toll of nonconformity, how can they ever effectively address that specific cognitive dissonance in real life? Think about what factors influence your own purchasing decisions for these products. Is it safety, cost, texture, or maybe a societal pressure you didn't even realize was operating?